Welcome to Every Night is Game Night, your home for heavy strategy, awesome theme, and everything in between. Check us out along with other great podcasts at dicetowernetwork.com.
Every Night is Game Night, episode 136, games from the Easter season, and a personal chat. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the Every Night is Game Night podcast. I'm your host, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us. This is just me this time, and there's actually a pretty particular reason for it. We are going to get to some games, obviously. That's what we do here on Every Night is Game Night. These are a couple of games that I got to the table this past Easter, inspired by the Easter season. So happy Easter to everybody. Happy Passover if you celebrate that way, or if you are not religiously affiliated. And you had some time with family. I actually just learned that in other countries they get Easter Monday off, which in America we do not as a federal holiday or a mandated thing. So jealous. Y'all have way more holidays than we do here in the States. But whatever your religious persuasion or whatever your reason for celebrating, I hope that you had a great time with family, friends, and most importantly, food. So I did get to some games on the table. Both of them were from Funhill Games. So Funhill Games is a company run by Lance Hill. Lance was nice enough to send over a couple of games. Thank you very much, buddy. He sent over Kings of Israel and the Wisdom of Solomon. So obviously they are themed kind of with that Old Testament, ancient Israel motif in mind, but they're fun actual games. They're religious games or games with religious themes, so they must be terrible. They must be like Bible Trivial Pursuit or something. No, these are solid games, and I'll tell you all about them. And we'll get to Liz. We'll get to all that good gamer fun stuff in just a minute. So the second half of the episode is, I guess you could say, it's inspired by a couple of posts that I've seen around. A couple of content creators and designers have posted blogs, little snippets on Twitter or on Facebook or anything, that are very different than what you usually see on social media. So what you usually see is happiness, and these are the games I'm playing. This is what I'm designing. This is what's happening, what I've achieved, really happy stuff. But every once in a while, you'll get a post where someone just kind of is honest and they just kind of tell it like it is, and they share something. Either they share something that happened to them, something upsetting that kind of explains some things about their recent behavior or their recent presence, or maybe they're just generally struggling with some mental health things. And whenever somebody comes out and does that without fail, and it's really nice to see, there is that kind of torrent of me too. I'm struggling with stuff too. I had no idea. All I see is nice stuff, and it's kind of nice to know that people are going through things, and they're not that we're not alone in some of these struggles. So to that end, I have decided that I'm going to share a little bit about me. So on a very personal level, I just wanted to let everybody know that I do suffer from depression. It's something I've struggled with for a very, very long time, and I'm going to go into a lot of that in the second half of the episode. So I definitely respect that not everybody wants to hear that. They want to keep it light, they want to keep it fun. And just as a spoiler alert, I'm okay. It's something it happens to me, and I've lived with it, but I've managed to get 135 episodes of Every Night is Game Night out there. I'm going to continue doing the podcast. So, this is not anything that is, really has any kind of tragic ending. But I do have some things that I wanted to share, get off my chest. And if there's other people that are out there that are struggling with some things, maybe there's some elements of my own story, my own journey that might resonate. But as always, let's get to some games first. We are going to start with Liz with the Liz We Trust segment. She never lets us down. She's always perusing Kickstarter for the latest project that might be of interest to you. So here is another one.
Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here to encourage your Every Night is Game Night acquisition disorder. Today I want to talk about Maquis, a solitaire worker placement game designed by Jake Staines in which you are the French resistance during World War II. It's already had a successful previous life as a celebrated PnP and app, so you can try Maquis out right now if you want to. But Maquis is now being updated and published by Sideburn Games. It's a small box game that packs a pretty big punch. Each game, you will draw 2 missions, which you'll need to complete within a limited time frame. To complete tasks and gather supplies, you must place members of the Resistance at various locations throughout the city. But be careful, there's several choke points around key locations, and for every worker you place, you'll also place a police officer, one who is cooperating with the Nazis and who will try to make sure you never come home. If all your workers are imprisoned, or if you can't complete your missions within 15 days, or if your village loses all of its morale under the occupation, you lose the game. Maquis is quick, tense, and a lot of fun, and I highly recommend it. Happy gaming!
Alright, so let us get to some actual gaming content that you can get to your table now. The first game that we're going to talk about is Kings of Israel. That was designed by Lance Hill, their first game, Front Hill's first game, I believe. And Lance's first game as well. So you may not have heard of Kings of Israel. If you have, and if you know one thing about it, you probably know that it is basically a pandemic variant. It does some different things, but for the most part, you're doing a lot of the same pandemic stuff. It reminds me of the games that came out kind of in the last couple of years, Pandemic Iberia, Pandemic Rising Tide, Pandemic Fall of Rome, which just came out a couple of months ago, in that it's basically taking the system and mixing it up and adding some different flavor and you putting it in a historical setting. So I think if you're going to think of Kings of Israel, think of it that way, in that family of variants that really changed games up. You know, I think that the official ones that Matt Leacock did do a really good job of remixing the basic mechanisms of Pandemic. You're not just playing the same old thing. And I think that on some level, Kings of Israel, you can kind of think of it the same way as a remix of the basic Pandemic stuff. But with that, on top of that basic engine. So in Kings of Israel, you are a prophet in ancient Israel in the time after King Solomon died. King Solomon died, I think maybe 1000 BC and 800 BC. Something like that. I think my Old Testament history it's been a little while since I took theology classes. But anyway, so what happens is King Solomon passes away, and there's a succession of bad kings who let quote-unquote sin reign in the land. And sin is basically the disease cubes. So the disease cubes, they basically work the same. You turn over a city deck, you put a cube on the land when there's 3 of them. As opposed to an explosion, there's an idol, like a calf that shows up, but it's basically the same thing. It's just terrible. You don't want that to happen. It kind of focuses your gameplay. You got to deal with these idol things. But for the most part, you're doing the same pandemic stuff. You're dealing with the idols. You're doing kind of a short-term, long-term thing where dealing with the cubes versus collecting sets of cards. So the sets of cards in this game, you're trying to build altars, which are, kind of centers of, purity in the Jewish religion. So you have to build them out of like these resources, gold and wood, and that kind of thing, stone. You're gathering cards and you're doing a lot of that basic stuff. How does this game kind of offer something new? So there's 2 things that are newish in this game that I really enjoyed. The first one is I can't think of a pandemic variant that has an event deck. So I don't think any of them have an actual event deck where it's like, so like in Arkham Horror, you have your monster phase after the players go, and then you also have a mythos phase where you pull over a card and you get a little bit of text, a little flavor, and then it kind of does something to the board to change things up a little bit. This game does that. So they call it the Sin and Punishment deck. And when you finish, you're spreading the cubes around, which is this kind of the same thing. You pull over the city and the cubes show up. The Sin and Punishment deck will hit you with something. And it'll hit you with, just a whole new thing that happens in the board. Maybe you were going for to go towards this area, and you're going to build a temple there, and you think it's going to be great, or altar, and you think it's going to be great, but then the event deck pulls an idol, and the golden calf just sits there. It's like, oh my god, I gotta completely change what thought I was going to do this turn. That's the whole point of an event deck. The whole point of an event deck is to kind of mix things up and add a little bit of flavor, a little bit of story. And this event deck does that. That Sin and Punishment deck really is fun. Sometimes it can turn what could be a seeming victory into something that draws you out and challenges you, which is really neat. It's one of those things where I didn't know I missed it until it happened. And I was like, oh, I wish more Pandemic games did that. So that was really fun. And then the second thing that I enjoyed, that's a mechanism that's distinct from the other Pandemics, or maybe not so much, it reminded me of Rising Tide a little bit. Rising Tide had that ocean mechanism where the ocean was constantly kind of pumping in water, so you had to pay special attention to, sources where the water would kind of like flow into the zones and create a lot of problems. Here, what you have is these the outer regions are like Assyria and Phoenicia, like real life empires that were competing with Israel. Look at or ancient Israel, Judah. I think it was called Judah back in the day. It was really kind of fragile state, brand new, the size of New Jersey. Like, I mean, we're not talking about a large nation at all. So you had these giant empires that were kind of like trying to exert cultural influence, which the game calls sin, which the Old Testament calls sin. We can debate the merits of that, but that's kind of how the Jews told their story. And the game represents that. It represents that by putting extra cubes on the board whenever you pull the land name. So if you pull Assyria, anything that's linked to Assyria, so 2 or 3 cities will get cubes, which that's cool. I really, really like that. It creates the sense that the board is different. It isn't just this flat thing. It's not just a grid. Well, in Pandemic, it's just a grid. There's no difference between Bombay and Sao Paulo and Washington. These are basically the same cities. Just the difference is the connection points. Here, you have to pay attention to the outer cities, so you can't just hang out. In one place. You have to really mind multiple points in the board. So maybe you want to meet up in the middle to trade cards because you have to trade cards, but then you have to go back out in order to deal with the threats out there. So just very dynamic, and I think that's what makes the world Pandemics better as a distinct experiences, is that they play with movement. They play with either board movement or cube movement or player movement. And so this game, through the mechanism of having so much trouble happen on the outer edges, plays with you, tugs at you in some pretty delicious ways. I really, really enjoyed that. I'm going to give one negative, and it's actually a pretty significant negative. Took away from my enjoyment a little bit. So in most Pandemic games, you get your cards, your city cards, you just get them. At the end of the round, you pull your 2 cards, and then you pull the Affection deck. And I think in all of them, I think there's, every single one of them, just kind of like this constant inflow of cards, which can be good and bad. Free cards. You don't have to use any of your action economy to get cards, which are resources. You could move around, fly around, whatever. But sometimes you're waiting for the card that you want. Sometimes you have 4 yellow and no yellows coming out of the deck. We're just waiting over here. This game tries to solve that by making card draw an action. So you can always, like, if you're, 1 card away, you can always decide, like, okay, I think the board is contained. I'm going to draw some cards and see if I can get the card that I want, which sounds great. But in practice, I found that I was drawing a lot. I've definitely found, especially in a low player count game, I played the solo a bunch of times, and it happened in most of my games where I'd be 1 resource away. It takes stone, wood, and gold to make the altar. And I'll only have stone and wood, and I'd be just pulling. I would spend entire turns using all 4 of my actions with whatever character, pulling and not getting anything. So in base Pandemic or in some of these other places, that almost never happens where you have a turn that's completely empty. You can always remove a cube. You can always, move around and set yourself up for a trade for another card. And you could do that here. If another player gets the card that you want, you coordinate trades and everything. In a low player count game, I find that's a little bit less likely. Or if it just happens to be a layout where you have to do a lot of movement and you have to find a lot of cubes, you haven't had a lot of time to draw. You just don't have that resource, and sometimes you get those dead turns. And it just felt, I don't know. I didn't like that gameplay of just pulling, and using my action, my precious actions. So that kind of detracted from the experience for me. For the most part, though, I was happy with it. I was, it's a game that the theme might not appeal to everybody, and that's the danger with religiously themed games. But if it does appeal to you at all as a historical person that wants to put this with some of the other pandemic historical games, or if you are in a religious setting and you want to, educate people, play something that's fun in the space, I can definitely give it a recommendation. So that was Kings of Israel from Funhill Games. So let's go over to Wisdom of Solomon. This was designed by Philip DuBarry, also published by Funhill Games. Like with Kings of Israel and the spreading mechanism, Wisdom of Solomon builds upon a basic mechanism. This time, you're getting worker placement. And it's a pretty pure worker placement game. There isn't too much else going on. The angel, so to speak, is in the details. So I'll run through some of my favorite little wrinkles here in a second. But for the most part, it's a worker placement game. It's one of those things where if you like worker placement, or you don't like worker placement, then that's going to decide whether you like this game or not. Because it's pretty, that's what you do. There isn't too much more to it than that. So, you are a governor for King Solomon. So we are before the time period of Kings of Israel. And Solomon built a temple. And what you're trying to do as governor is you're trying to build the best, get the most favor, and, have the most honor in the court. So you're trying to do the best that you can, build the temple faster and, use better materials and however the game represents that. So that's the theme. That's what you're doing. With Kings of Israel. Like with Kings of Israel, Wisdom of Solomon lives and dies by what's unique about what they layer on top of the basic mechanisms. Here, I think what's unique are the different ways to get, exchange, and spend resources. So the resources themselves are, whatever, wood, stone, copper, food, that kind of thing. But there's a couple of interesting ways in which they flow around the board and to your player mat, and kind of you spending them in order to do what you got to do in the game. So the first way you gather resources is there are worker placement spots outside of the walls of Israel. So you can imagine one part of the board is actual Israel itself, and it has the temple is replicated, and a couple of other stalls. But then outside you have the zones. Which represent the cultures that were surrounding Israel at the time, just like with Kings of Israel. Only here, King Solomon, I guess according to the telling, is the boss. That was a prosperous time for Jews relative to their neighbors. So you put there's a lot of different spots to put your worker, and when you put your worker there, you gather resources, but you also build custom houses and roads. Which will increase your network, which is cool because you can actually increase the effectiveness of the spot by how many zones are linked via road to that one particular zone. So you can, put your worker down and it's linked to like 4 zones, you get 4 resources, which you built that. At the beginning of the game, you got 1. Now you're putting it down, you get 4. It's almost like, and this game came out way later, but Architects of the West Kingdom has that mechanism where you put one of your workers down, you get a thing, but you put a second worker down, you get 2 things, and then 3 things, and then 4 things. Here, you're not putting workers down in the same space, you're putting down the roads. So in that way, you're kind of, pushing it, and you're challenging the other player to say, oh no, I'm not going to let you get too powerful. You're getting over here 4, 5, 6 resources at a turn, and you're, cash them in right away. I'm going to do my suboptimal thing just to block you. So that's a kind of a challenging thing. Then that's pretty cool. Another thing that this game does in order to kind of mix up the resources is that there's another space inside of Israel where you can kind of buy and sell, and trade resources. So you go to one place and you can, sell for 3 favor. And in this game, favor is currency, so victory points are currency. The more victory points you spend, the more resources you get, but obviously it hurts your score, so you have to do that very wisely. So you can sell high, and so if you notice that there's a lot of resources that are available for very cheap, sell one of your goods for a really, really good price, and then get another good, or 2 or 3 goods for a lower price, so you end up ahead in the trade, and use those to do your exchanges and everything. I mean, that's just, it's subtle, but I like that it isn't just place a dude, get a thing. That's the most boring worker placement game. When they go wrong, I think that's kind of where they go wrong, is place a dude, get a thing. And then they try to, some games try to kind of wrinkle it up after that fact, but like the raw fact of place a dude, get a thing is still there, and that's boring. Here, they do a lot to kind of mix that up. The last thing that I liked about the way Wisdom of Solomon works, is you can just, completely just punt your turn. And what you do is there's special spots on the board. They're next to the temple. And you go there and you put all your workers there. So let's say you have whatever it is, 4 workers, 5 workers. You put every worker you have left on a space, and you get to do a really powerful action. So you get resources that are, you match the resources of the guy next to you, or you get extra cards. So there's cards that you can draw in order to get special powers. So if you want to, you can take that space and just dig it and have a special power. Even though you don't have as many workers available to you, you actually managed to get something really satisfying out of it. So I think of a game like Lords of Waterdeep, where if you've played that game, you find that your first couple of workers are very impactful. You've placed them on buildings or created buildings, and you got stuff. But then those last couple of placements, you kind of doing suboptimal stuff. It's like, what am I doing here? You can you can avoid those suboptimal placements and just go at a really powerful space, end your turn there, and kind of ninja something away from your opponent. So in those ways, it's a little bit more interactive than some worker placement games that you might play. I enjoyed that. It's still simple. I wouldn't say this is a complicated game at all. Still family weight. It is not a midweight game at all. It's family friendly. So good, and with more interaction than you would get in a normal worker placement game. I thought it was solid as just a multiplayer game. There is a solo mode, which I did not like. You guys know I love my solo. There's a bot called Jeroboam, and it makes the mistake of making you track a lot of things. It's scoring along with you. It's selling resources with you. It has resources that is kind of gathering everything. I don't want to do that. I guess maybe it's an expectation thing. I've been taught by the Automas and some of the other bots that bots should be quick. And I think that's good. I mean, every time I would try to kind of take it out, I was like, okay, let me give this a shot. Let me stop being a baby and just track my stuff. It just wasn't fun. And that at the point of playing games like this is fun. It is not fun to track for a bot, for the sake of putting score pressure on you. Like, you can simulate that score pressure without resources, without anything. It's like you just hear the bot scores a bunch, it cheats. Play well. And I don't think the way the game is constructed that it can quite do that, because it needs that dynamic resource exchange market to work. Just not really appealing to me. But it's it's pretty solid family weight worker placement game if you want to open up this world of ancient Israel, but not in a cooperative game, and something competitive, and something actually that has a little bit of competitive teeth to it. So I'm going to give a recommendation for the multiplayer version for families for Wisdom of Solomon. All right, so that is the gaming content for the episode. If that is what you tuned in for, then thank you very much, and I will see you next week with some more gaming goodness. But what I'm going to do here is transition to the second part of the episode, which is where I talk about myself. Like I was saying before in the intro, I've had a lot of things kind of lead me to here, and it hasn't always been pretty. Sometimes I feel like I've gotten here by the skin of my teeth. But yeah, I mean, I won't belabor the point anymore. I mean, I've had some serious stuff happen to me, so I just wanted to share that. And, I do not blame you at all if you just want to engage with the game content. So you're good to go here. But before I get into too much of my personal stuff, I would like to make a distinction between depression and sadness. So I said in the intro that I'm suffering from depression. That's much different than sadness, and I think a lot of people kind of don't get that, which is a problem, which is one of the main problems. For a long time in a lot of cultures, and I think a lot of cultures still participate in this, depression doesn't even exist. Like, it's not a category, it's not a thing. Like, people are just sad. And sadness is an emotion. Sadness is a thing that you feel, and it comes and it goes, and it's a response to, things that happen, and, eventually you kind of get over it and buck up and get happy and everything. So, that's what depression is, right? And depression, a lot of people feel, is just like sadness persisting, and sadness just lasting a long time. Well, as a mental health therapist, I'm here to tell you that it is not the same as sadness. In fact, it's a difference in kind. It's a wholly different thing. The difference between depression and sadness is the difference between being tired and being sleep deprived. It's the difference between getting dizzy from spinning around and having a concussion. They feel very similar. These are all experiences that feel very similar, but one is an emotion and one is a brain state. So emotions come and go, and emotions, we feel them every day. And, I would love it. I would love if depressed people were just sad and we could cheer them up, put them on a comedy show or put on something. But depression is when I say it's a brain state, it's just something that we can't really change. Like, you can't tell somebody to get over a concussion, despite what some sports teams say, where it's like, okay, you got your bell rung, and they use that euphemism. It's like, all right, get back out there, you're fine. It's not. You are not fine, and a depressed person is not fine. It's just an inability to find joy. It's so hard to explain. Like, for a sad person, you can almost kind of get them to crack a smile if you kind of overload them with joyful things, sunny days, it's anything. And you can kind of penetrate the cloud a little bit. When you're depressed, there's no penetrating that. I don't care what happens. There's just there's a profound lack of interest, lack of engagement, and it's almost like you're making it worse. You're making it, like I've had the experience of clients coming in and it's like a sunny day and they're just like worse, because it's almost, the way I describe it sometimes is, you're in a room and happiness is in another room, and there's a locked door between you, and you just can't open that door to happiness. You can't do it no matter what. And it's not a choice. It is not a choice. You're just locked. You, as sure as a drunk person can't add 2 + 3 + 4 + 5, or like count backwards or whatever they do on the police things to test your sobriety, you cannot do that. And a depressed person just doesn't have access to it. So that's how I mean depression. It's, in its own way is as incomplete as the story that says depression is just sadness. My preferred approach to talking about depression is I talk about it as disconnection. So when I'm in sessions, I like to say that depression is another word for disconnection. So what do I mean? You're disconnected from a lot of things. You could be disconnected from the people around you, or they could be there, but they don't know you. They misunderstand you. That's a disconnection right there. You could be disconnected from values. You could be disconnected from meaningful work. If your job stinks, and you just hate it, you hate yourself for going. I describe that as a disconnection from meaning and purpose in your work. You could be, like I was saying before about values, you might just be stuck in a scenario with the wrong values. It's materialistic, it's individualistic, it's selfish, and you have to be that way in order to get ahead or get promotions or be political, whatever. You could be disconnected from a secure future. You could look at either, yourself and your earning potential. You're going to be working until you're 90. Or you're looking at the planet and climate change is going to like ruin things. Like there's so many ways in which we can experience disconnection in our lives, and that's how I talk about depression. In its own way, depression is, I think of it like a smoke alarm in a building, to where if the smoke alarm is ringing, which is we're feeling depressed, then that indicates a problem somewhere else. There's a fire raging somewhere else. There's a disconnection raging somewhere else. So in its own weird way, that makes depression kind of a good thing. It means our body is working. So if you're depressed, more often than not, something is inside you is going wrong, and you go look for that other thing that is wrong. So when we just turn to medications, it's almost like looking at a smoke alarm and just turning on the battery. It's like, stop doing your thing, stop being depressed, without actually changing the basic things that are wrong, that are making, that are fire, that are making things go badly for you. So sometimes, yes, sometimes medication is necessary in order to even begin to treat your problems, but for the vast majority of situations, I find that folks are depressed because of something that happens. Something that's happening in your life. So I've gone all this way. I haven't talked about me yet. I'm terrible at this. I got depressed when I was 15. I was a sophomore in high school. I was on the football team, and I got bit by a tick, and I got Lyme disease. That Lyme disease, however, was not discovered until a year later, and you would think like I was in the middle of deer tick country in Monticello, New York, which is where all the deer ticks were. But it was 1992. I got Lyme disease. It was undiagnosed. If you know anything about Lyme disease, undiagnosed Lyme disease is pretty bad. So I was bit in August during the summer, and then I went that entire school year just, getting worse, and people just not knowing what was going on. And the seeds of what I was talking about, that disconnection, were being planted, and that's where the depression came in. No one believed me. No one believed me that I was sick. No one believed me that my joints were hurting. No one believed me that I was developing these painful headaches. I looked fine. So I would tell teachers, and the teachers would be like, well, I can give you an extension, but I can't really help you. I tell family and I tell friends, and, they'd be supportive, but it just, when there was like a break. There was a divide between the support that I was able to get and what I needed. And what I needed was a lot. So by the time that Christmas came around, I was completely disconnected from school, dropped out, and I was a mess, and just in the throes of depression. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that was the first time in my life I was like genuinely suicidal. I wanted to die. And let me pause there, because I know that can be a scary thing, that I wanted to die. And when somebody says they're suicidal, as a therapist and as somebody who's kind of experienced that from the inside, what they're saying by that word, I'm, having suicide ideation, is I feel really bad. I feel worse than any word can express. I can't say it with depression. I can't say it with sadness. I can't say it with some, curse word, because I happen to think that curses are the language of pain. So I'm not opposed to using curse words at all, but it's still the Dice Tower. So I'm going to respect that, but I'm just going to put it out there that I felt pretty, blank bad. And so when someone says they're suicidal, they're saying, please make it stop. And it could go either way, like if they're really saying it and they mean it with some kind of depth, they radically need support. And if they don't get it, it could, be really bad. I think there's a tendency to either minimize or some people, they maximize, like, some people, that's not the worst thing in the world. I'd rather maximize than minimize, say, kind of, I'm going to call the paramedics and I'm going to call the hospital and all that good stuff. 9 times out of 10, like what they're asking for is just genuine support. They're asking to be taken out of whatever situation that they're in, whether it's school, whether it's work, whether it's anything. They're asking to be taken out of that situation and cared for and really listened to and really acknowledged, that their pain is acknowledged. And then they'll figure it out from there. And what I needed at that point was someone to do that. And, and when I was that age, it was just so difficult. And I think what got me kind of going was a diagnosis. Like the fact that, that January I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, or that February or something. But that by then it was months and months, and Lyme disease had kind of chronic by then. But at the very least, now I understood that there was something going on, and that kind of like took me out of it a little bit. But while I was in it, whoa. How did I cope? A lot of music. It was 92. 92 was like the huge explosion of, grunge music at the time. And it was all sad. It was all angsty. It was like the perfect music for me. I think my theme song from that moment was like, if you guys know the band Pearl Jam, the last song on the album 10 called Release, that's kind of like my headache song. That's kind of like my depression song. I can't listen to that song without getting a little bit teary-eyed. I mean, it definitely brings me back to that mindset of just being very depressed, very headachy, very sick. And at that point, I went back to school. I needed a lot of support. I was, the school kind of knew, and so I was able to kind of like fudge my way through. But it was difficult. It took me 5 years to graduate, and I had a lot of kind of ups and downs with it. A thing that helped me a lot was I applied for the American SSI. I applied for disability. So disability, I was able to kind of get a little bit of, extra help. They put me on the state insurance, which is state insurance. That actually was more valuable to me than some, whatever stipend you get. Because I was able to see, doctors consistently. I got like millions of dollars of testing, and not millions, but like, it was a lot of testing to figure out what else was wrong with me, because I just wasn't getting better. And I mentioned that because one of the things that I remember very clearly is being like, I had to apply for an appeal. And I remember, because they thought they rejected me. I was in my last appeal, and I'm in front of a judge, and I'm telling my story. And I remember making the stenographer cry. Like, she was weeping at her little typewriter, hearing me, and at this point I'm like 17, 18, 19 years old, something, I forget exactly when. But hearing me talk about my headaches, talk about not being able to get out of bed, even when it's like a bright sunny day and everything's awesome, hearing that there are times where I don't want to watch the Jets. I'm a big American football Jets fan. I get so depressed. I got, at one point my kidneys failed because of medicines that I was taking, and it was just a disaster of a childhood. And I had some good times, but like kind of behind the screen, I was like really struggling. And just, struggling with what I was talking about before, that sense of disconnection. And, the stenographer came up to us, me and my mom, afterwards, and said, she was a mess. She was like, wow, I've never heard a story like that. That sounds like so painful. So, moving on, it was not great. I mean, I went to University of Buffalo for college. I had to come home after a month because I got sick. They took tests, and it was like I was bitten by 10 more ticks. Like the Lyme disease was just like spiking through the roof. And eventually I got back to college. Now, it took a long time graduating college. I did a lot of jobs. I like to talk about, I was a teacher. I was a lot of other things. I quit a lot of these jobs because my sickness just kept on flaring up, and I kept on, getting, struggling and getting worse. So then 2008 happens. I quit another job, and I know I can't work. Like it's gotten so bad. My depression's gotten so bad, and I'm genuinely suicidal. And if I wasn't for having my mom around, I don't know if I'd be here. I'm pretty sure I do know whether I'd be here or not. I just don't want to get too dark over here, but I was in bad shape. And they put me in the psych ward, and they did the medication thing. I don't love medication for me, but that's kind of I had to try something. So that was like the disaster time in my life. I spent a lot of time at home, not working, laid up, often not being able to get out of bed for days at a time, and just headaches. Ugh. I mean, I've cried like profoundly twice in my entire life. Once was in the aftermath of 9/11. I'm a New Yorker. I was in New York when it happened. Like that was just really powerful for me, and just contemplating my headaches. It's just the most crippling thing I can't even explain. Just the pair of having the headaches and the depression kind of raging at the same time. So, before I wallow, before I can just kind of go on like this, and I kind of feel like as I'm talking into the microphone, feel myself getting a little bit emotional, I do want to kind of turn the story a little bit, because 2008 is where the story turns. Or like kind of moving forward from there. So, like I talked about coping skills before, I talked about music, how did I stay alive? Like at that time in 2008, as funny as this sounds, and this is going to sound really funny and really weird, and it's kind of why I'm sharing this on like a gaming podcast of all things. The thing that kept me alive, almost like a life support, I played a lot of World of Warcraft. I mean, a lot of World of Warcraft. It was painful, like, the headaches, staring at a screen for however long, I have to turn away, and, manage at all, but like it's basically at the time that was all I had, and I played the crap out of that game. And thank God I had it. I mean, it was interesting. I'm a big adventure guy. You guys know I love my adventures. And I had my little dwarf. I maxed out his level. I got all these achievements and, raided and did all the raiding guilds and everything. So like, I mean, it wasn't a life, but it was something. And I talk about depression as disconnection, and I was in a guild, and I actually met some of the people in real life. I don't think I've retained any friends, like real life friends, but I did meet them in real life, and it was actually, kind of better than nothing. And that just kind of, I persisted that way for a little while. I didn't really start getting better, until I reconnected with D&D. So, World of Warcraft is D&D adjacent, and I'm not really sure how I got back into D&D. I think some friends of mine were running a campaign, so, what else am I going to do? So played, and I was a big player when I was a younger kid. So, I've always kind of floated around it. But for whatever reasons, I needed to connect. I needed to connect with people, and D&D is great for that table kind of interchange. And then as eventually I got into it more and more, I started to, go to what they called Living Forgotten Realms, which was like kind of public D&D. There's modules, GMs sign up and they run it, and I actually got pretty good at it. I got pretty good at, making characters. I got pretty good at, just like memorizing feats and skills. And, eventually I DM'd. I think I became a pretty good DM over a couple of year span. So we're talking like 2010, 11. Silly as it sounds, my friends. I mean, World of Warcraft and D&D, I don't know where I would be without these things. And then in 2012, I drove out to what they call a Winterfest. This was in the middle of the country. And Lords of Waterdeep was there. That was my first modern board game, and I was only drawn to it because I was a D&D guy. And they're telling me, it's like, oh, this is a Euro. And, we've never made a Euro board game before. And I didn't know what a Euro was. I didn't really even know what board games were at all. And that's... that's my entry into board gaming. And gaming in general, gaming in a profound way, literally saved my life. And there's a lot else there. I mean, there's friends. There's a couple of friends that are listening to this podcast right now. Maybe this is the first time they're hearing kind of me tell the full story, just all together like this. They know all the details. It's not kind of like not together. But, without them, I wouldn't be around either. And as, obviously I talked about my mom. I would, oh my God. I love that woman to death. So, there was stuff going on there, but without gaming, it might not have been enough. I needed something else, something beyond myself. And that was it. And, that's kind of where a lot of my passion comes from for the podcast and for creating content. This stuff saved my life, and this stuff is, especially nowadays. I'll get to nowadays in a second, but like I have baby and life, and now I'm like, oh my god, like my life is all different. But gaming is the thing that keeps me sane. I'm in my basement now, surrounded by these board games, and it's like I can't wait to play that. Can't wait to play that. It's like, wow, pretty cool. But let me not rush past that. So, 2012 happens. I discover Lords of Waterdeep. In 2013, I discover Pandemic, and the cooperative game things happens, and the solo game things happen, and away we go. So here I am now. I think I've kind of managed it better. I'm doing treatment. I did yoga, and I still have Lyme disease. I'm gonna have Lyme disease for the rest of my life. There's times where I get stressed and headachy and everything, and then depression kind of triggers from that, because people still don't understand. It's just hard to explain, and I think that's the part that I'm hoping resonates with a lot of folks out there, that no matter what you try to explain, but for whatever reason your particular constellation of things that are going on with you together are just so hard to explain, and it's just so defeating. And I just want to let people out there know that I feel the same way. And as a therapist and as a friend and as someone who really cares, like, just I hope that you find somebody that to reach out to, and that will try to understand, because even the trying might be important. Building off of 2012, met my wife, got married, I just built, slowly, just grinding, gaming, gaming and grinding along the way. So here I am now, 2019. I'd like to think things are going a little bit better, but depression is still kind of there. And I'm always, every single day I have to check in with myself. Okay, how can I just keep this going and not sink back to where I was? So there's two things I wanted to say, and this is kind of where I'll close it. The first is, like, life, society. Like, there's a lot of depressing crap that's going on, like, in the world. And I'm a social worker. I was trained as a social worker, so I think about depression globally. I think about it in terms of kind of societal, structural things. Anyway, that's my training. So I'm just naturally inclined to look at some of what's going on in our society. I live in America, 21st century, and if you know anything about America, we love our fences. We don't know our neighbors. We'd rather watch TV, and the TV we're watching is like, we're watching news, and which is full of violence. And it's almost like if you started a society from scratch and you wanted people to be as individualistic and divided from each other as possible, you'd kind of come close to, discovering America. Like, we just have all these reasons to not connect with one another. That's a struggle for me as someone who kind of needs that deep connection with people. So there's a lot of folks out there, and I get this from friends and clients, and I feel it myself sometimes, of they don't have a lot of friends in their life. In fact, they may have zero truly good friends. I read a study once where, like, in the past in our country, Americans would be able to name 2 or 3 really, really good friends they trust. Nowadays, that number is like 0.4, which means a whole swath of people can't identify a single person who they trust and who's like a true, genuine friend. That's like horrifying. A lot of times I'll hear people say, I don't have people in my life. Every time I try, it doesn't work out, and the only constant is me. There must be something wrong with me. I must be the one that is effed up. And what I want to say to that is, there is another constant. There's many, many more constants. Like, if you're living in the same environment, if you're living in the same country or region or whatever it is, there's just so many social forces that are conspiring. Especially as a parent, man. Oh my God, a parent in this country, the childcare is crazy, and God forbid you want to, try to get some help that doesn't cost like an arm and a leg for your child and everything. Don't even get me started. Don't want to turn this into a political thing, but whatever. But there's so much that's kind of fostering loneliness. I like to use the line in session that a lot of mental illness is actually societal illness that hits us personally. In some ways, we live in a sick society. Just look on Reddit, or look and look on some of the things that are happening. There's so many ways in which we live in a sick society, but it hits us personally, and so many of us blame ourselves. And I do that sometimes too, and I'm trying really hard not to. That in order to kind of keep my mind, out of that space. So I'm putting it out there for anybody that's thinking that way as well, as like that there's something wrong with them. That's why they're depressed. That's why they're lonely. No, it's a lot more in life that's pushing us towards that, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault. So that's one thing. And then I guess the second thing that I guess reflecting on my own personal kind of being, like, do I feel lonely? It's like, yes, sometimes I feel lonely. I moved away from my family, moved up to Connecticut. I'm kind of disconnected from my longtime friends. Am I doing everything that I can to, make friends? And I have to take a personal inventory for myself and say, it's rough for me because I'm an intense guy. Like, I think you guys can sense that. Like, I love to get into a good conversation. I'm very, sometimes I feel like I'm like this smoldering mass of just like, wanting to talk and connect. A lot of people describe me as like a very energetic person. Sometimes I'm very overwhelming. And especially comes out when in like social, kind of light social situations, like where there's a lot of chit chat that's expected. Oh my God, I just don't like chit chat whatsoever. I hate chit chat. I did that thing a couple episodes ago where I asked my listeners if you wanted to hear more chit chat, like, just kind of like BSing on ENGN, the way a lot of other podcasts do. And a lot of you guys said, no, keep it the same way. Just, give us game content and give us, just talk within the flow of whatever game or whatever discussion topic. And I'm like, yes. Oh my God, thank you. I actually felt really connected with some of you guys. Thank you so much for reaching out. And so sometimes, like in real life, I'll kind of give the impression that I don't want to be there talking to you. If it's just like this, maybe it's at a con or maybe it's at some place where you have to be at a surface level. You can't just like leap in and discuss serious things or get to the, you can't rush that stuff. Like the chit chat is really important. I as a person, as me, I just get so impatient with it. Like, I love people so much. I love people, but I hate chit chat. I hate the surface. I get very uncomfortable at the surface, where most people it's the exact opposite. Like, they want to be at that surface level and they get uncomfortable at the deep level. So why am I putting this part out there? I'm putting this part out there because it's kind of connected to that idea that, like, there's something wrong with me, quote unquote, and they don't identify what it is. It's like, the world is conspiring to keep you lonely. I guess I want to encourage people to look at their own personalities and figure out if there's anything that they can do proactively to try to increase connection. I had to look at that myself, and I'm trying my best. I'm getting better at some of that stuff, but it's so hard because, especially with the social media, like, everything is surface, and there's days where I just don't want to connect with it at all, and that puts me behind. And I wish that the audience was bigger and the connection was better, but I got to do the best that I can with what I am, because I'm not going to compromise off of that. That's where I thrive, is that deep stuff, the real conversations, real. More, so in terms of ENGN, more mental health conversations, more serious conversations, kind of walled off from the gaming like I usually do. Not going to compromise off of that, but I do have to negotiate certain times where, I can't expect people to be serious all the time. So I would welcome people who feel disconnected to kind of look at themselves and assess, what are they doing that they can connect with people. I'm saying that word a lot. Connection. It comes from a book. It's called Lost Connections by Johann Hari. It is the best book that I can recommend to talk about depression in a different way. I'm totally influenced by that. It's one of my top 3 books of all time. I read it again and again just to kind of refresh myself in that. That's how I understand depression. It shaped my whole world. And it makes total sense. And whenever I feel like I'm kind of losing it, I just go back to that idea, like, okay, what can I connect to? What if I can't connect to people, maybe I can connect to work or some kind of gainful, productive activity, not necessarily like wage labor, but like something that productive that I can do. Or, maybe I need to get back to nature. That's another disconnection, something. So I encourage you to read the book, encourage you to reach out. Now you guys know I'm a therapist, but I'm also a client. I have my own therapist too. I work through my own issues as well. And that's what I have. And that I don't think, just kind of laying it out there. I struggle with depression. I've done many things to try to get myself, back on my feet, get going. And I would invite any person who's thinking along this way, whether it's depression, anxiety, or something else, trauma. I haven't even talked a lot about trauma. Like trauma, I suffered a trauma when I was 15 because of everything that happened. I actually don't remember anything from before 15, maybe like 4 things. So my family gets really cheesed off at me because I don't remember Disneyland. I don't remember all these other trips and all this other stuff. I'm like, oh, it's gone because of trauma. So like, I understand that too. So if you have any of that kind of stuff, please reach out to me, private messages or, anything like that. Please don't be afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of this stuff. And, private messages, people have reached out to me before. Or if you wanted to just kind of have a social conversation that, about what you're going through. Some of the people that I mentioned earlier in the show of people who struggle, like we had Mark Davis and Paul Grogan on the show. They are public. Mark has talked about depression on his podcast. Paul talks about depression and anxiety, and his feeds and everything. If you missed it, Morten Monrad Pedersen, for the guy who does the Automas, he recently wrote a blog talking about his bipolar. Bipolar that's serious stuff. It's manageable, you medicate it, you get treatment, and it's, I think that's kind of what he was saying, but it's a scary thing to kind of like put out there. And, I love it. I love that he did that. And I love that anybody that reveals and talks about the stuff they're going through inspired me to do this. I hope it's helpful to you. If you want to talk about any of this stuff, ENGN_podcast on the Twitter, Every Night is Game Night Facebook group, Every Night is Game Night.com, which is the Board Gamers Anonymous site where everything is hosted, private mail by Geek List. Reach out to me. I'm really excited to hear from you. Like, this is all about connection, right? I'm putting myself out there. I'm saying connect. So I got to be ready for whatever I get. So that's basically it. I hope that you guys got something out of this. I was going to say I hope you guys enjoyed it, but that was, you don't enjoy stuff like this. I just hope that you guys resonated and that something good came out of it. So yeah, that's basically it. We are going to get back to regular gaming content next week. So until then, go ahead and grab a game off of that shelf and let's make every night a game night.